Marie broke up with her boyfriend, Jason, a month ago and has been single since. She misses the company, going out, having a coffee, or having a meal. She found it hard to meet people, and her friends were praising the dating app Tinder. Some even said they met amazing people through the app. Her best friend Sarah is with her boyfriend of 6 months, and they met on Tinder, so she decided to give it a go. She set up a date through Tinder in a local bar where they had a few drinks. Her date was a man in his early 20s called Sam. He had a really good job and she found him dreamy looking, and he seemed to tick all the boxes for her type of guy. There was a guy playing pool next to them, and Marie found it strange what happened. The guy accidentally hit Sam. He turned around to apologize and said, "Oh, sorry, buddy." Sam didn't answer, just gave him a cold, nasty look. Marie found it very, very strange indeed, but overlooked it. After the drinks, Sam asked Marie would she like a drive home, and she knew he only drank coffee in the bar, so there was no reason to refuse. Plus, it was a half-hour walk to her house and she felt very tired. She said that would be great, and they both walked out into Sam's car. When they arrived at Marie's house, they walked up to her door and Marie said, "Thanks." Sam was hoping she'd ask him in, and he felt relief when she said, "Would you like to come in for another coffee?" "Sure," he said. When Marie shut the door, she turned to kiss Sam, and all of a sudden, a man bolted for Sam, knocking him to the ground. Marie screamed in terror, and then realized the man who knocked Sam to the ground was her ex-boyfriend Jason. She knew he was the jealous type, but never expected him to attack the next guy she met. She shouted at him to stop. Jason suddenly grabbed a gun out of his pocket and shot Sam in the shoulder. Sam fell, holding his shoulder, crying in pain. Marie was trembling in fear with her crazy ex-boyfriend in front of her, holding a gun. He said, "Don't move." Suddenly, Sam pointed a gun right at Jason and shot him in the head. Marie cried hysterically, knowing her ex-boyfriend was just killed before her eyes, but knew if it wasn't him, he would have shot her. Jason looked up at her and said, "Don't worry, it was self-defense." Then she heard movement behind her and turned around to see a large man staring straight at her. It suddenly hit her that her boyfriend wasn't telling her not to move, but he was telling the man behind her not to move to save her. Fear and dread rushed through her, knowing she was alone with two men who would no doubt kill her. Suddenly the door burst open, knocking the guy in front of Marie, and Sam lifted the gun, shouting, "Get back or I'll shoot." It was the man from the bar playing pool. He ducked and rammed right into Sam, then lifted his fist and punched him so hard he knocked him out. He then grabbed the gun, pointing it at the other man, and shouted, "You move one muscle and I'll shoot your head off." Marie had already rang the police. The man introduced himself to Marie after the police arrived and told her, after explaining to the police, he knew there was something off about the guy and knew something was up. When he left a note on the table, he walked over and gave a glance just before a man could pick it up, and it had written on it, "Follow us, I'm going to her house." So he followed them to see what was going on. Marie was thanking her lucky stars, how lucky she was that the man whose name was Tom was observant enough to spot something very sinister was going on. She worried what could have happened to her if he didn't save her, and she promised herself she'd never ever date anyone through Tinder or anyone online again.
Me and my friends were camping for the weekend, and we were really excited, as we had planned it for weeks. There were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls, 2 couples. We were deep in the woods when we decided to set up our tent. Each couple had their own tent. It was a moonlit night, so the brightness that was there was coming through the trees, even though it was still very dark, as the trees blocked out most of the moonlight, which added to the creepiness of the whole atmosphere deep in the woods. We lit a fire in the middle of the space we set up the tent. It was hard work gathering the wood, harder than I expected. I never expected it to be so hard building a fire in the woods. In the movies, it's almost like the fire is already there. After the fire was lit, we started drinking some beer and told ghost stories. Suddenly, when it was my time to tell my story, I heard some noise over by the trees. I feared it was a bear or even some crazy stalker. My friend walked over to investigate, and he suddenly jumped and screamed, then started laughing and said, "Oh my god, guys, ye are so over-dramatic." Then suddenly something caught his eye. He was bending down to look at something in the grass and picked it up. He seemed to be holding a piece of wood, and whatever was on it was making him act very strange. We all asked him, what was it? When he walked over, he showed us and said, "That's weird, right?" It was a piece of wood with "Find Me" written in red. I felt fear overcome me, wondering, could it even be blood? My friend said, "What the hell is this about?" I said, "It looks pretty weird. I mean, find who?" My other friend was laughing, saying, "Maybe it's the boogeyman. Woo!" His girlfriend started laughing until there was another noise from over the other side of the clearing. My friend walked over and yet again saw another piece of wood with writing on it. He brought it over to show us. "I'm down this direction. Keep going." We all said together, "No way are we going down there." I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep, but it was too late to trek back out of the woods at this time of night, so we just decided to call it a night and be happy to get out of here in the morning. When we were just about to rest our heads and get some sleep, I noticed there was a shadow of a hand outside my tent. I froze in fear, anticipating what it could be outside, and told my boyfriend. He reluctantly opened the zip of the tent, and there, outside of the tent, was a little boy drenched from head to toe in water. He was about 10 years old, and he was crying, saying, Why didn't anyone find me?" Suddenly, he seemed to disappear into thin air. We had the pieces of wood with the writing gathered outside, so we decided to keep them to tell the police the next day. When we did, the sheriff looked at us, strange. "Ye damn kids, playing these sick games. Why can't ye let that poor boy rest?" That night, we learned that 10 years ago, on that very night, in the direction the piece of wood was telling us to go, a 10-year-old boy drowned while running from his parents to hide while they were playing hide and seek. Jake was watching TV, and there was a program on about a hiking trail he always wanted to do. He knew it was a very long hike, and it would require a lot of perseverance as the trail went on and on for miles. It was in the outback in Utah. He didn't want anyone to go with him on the hike, as he was looking for something to take his mind off his very stressful job as being a lawyer. Jake just wanted to relax for 2 weeks on the hike into the outback of Utah. On the day of his hike, he figured he would need snow gear, as the weather was so cold. Sure enough, when he was on his way, it began to snow. He picked the wrong time of the year, he told himself, but he proceeded to go through the trail. He was using his phone as a compass, but it didn't seem to help him much. He seemed to be getting nowhere. There was a huge snow blizzard arrived, and he tried to trek through the snow and find shelter. Eventually, he luckily came across a cave. He rested, hoping that he would get the energy to move out of this rut that he found himself in, trapped inside a cave in the middle of a wretched snow blizzard. He felt himself getting more and more disorientated. He felt like he could not even move with the numbing cold. He could feel the sting of the ice on his skin, and he felt he was going to die. But that survival instinct crept up in him and told him what he had to do. What he had to do to survive. He hoped the blizzard would pass, but unfortunately it went on for days and days. He had no problem with water, but he knew that if he didn't eat anything soon, he would eventually die. He was thankful of the snow he used for drinking water. He felt weak and looked down at his pants, knowing there would be a lot of meat on his leg. He knew what he had to do to survive, so he took a large knife from his bag and proceeded to cut parts of his leg off to eat. He died faster than he would have if he starved, as he bled to death in the freezing snow.
Hi, this is a story I have from when I was a boy, about 10. I remember my mom used to tell me all cool stories about a ballroom called the Shiny Ballroom. It sounded like a really cool place. She told me back then all the girls were at one side and all the boys were at the other side. And when the slow dances came on, the boys would walk or sometimes slide across the floor to ask the girl who they would like to dance with out to dance. The ballroom used to also have all the biggest show bands and singers of the time. This would have been around the 60s and 70s, in the height of the rock and roll and show band era. There was a crystal ball in the middle of the room. I'd love to have known what would it have been like to grow up in the rock and roll era. When I was 10, the ballroom was shut down for years, and it was abandoned as long back as I can remember. It actually was not even open when I was born, I'd say. I remember seeing teenagers go around the back of the hall, so I realized that there must have been an entrance into the building. One day, me and my mom were passing it, coming back from shopping, and we decided to take a look at the back of the building. We saw a window smashed, and it was an entrance into the building. Me and Mom decided to climb up in through the opening to see what the building was like now. We climbed through the space and noticed an eerie, lonesome atmosphere. I remember thinking of all the dances and people who met each other and happy times, and now it's just this dark and creepy abandoned building. We walked through an entrance where the steps were down to the dance floor. My mom was telling me where the people used to dance, and she showed me where the crystal ball used to hang from the ceiling. It was now just an old piece of cable hanging from the ceiling. I tried to imagine how this place once looked. It must have been such an incredible, lively dance hall back in its day. We walked through the dance floor, and there was a drawing of a couple dancing on the wall. My mom showed me where the boys used to sit and the girls. I realized how different things are today. We walked through the hall, and at the back of it there was a side room. I noticed something very creepy on the wall. Even though I was 10, I was a fan of heavy metal, so I knew what a pentagram was, or some people might call it the Devil's Star. I told Mom to look, and I shone the light on the wall. There was a pentagram written in red with 666 below it, and a satanic verse saying, "Death will rest here" at the end of it. Me and Mom found it very creepy, and I felt uneasy being in the room. I had a fear of anything to do with Satanism or the devil, and back then it was the satanic pandemic. Loads of stories were breaking on the news about different things linked to Satanism, and I was only a kid, so it freaked me out totally. I often think I would have loved to have taken a photo of that verse on the wall. You might wonder why, but it will make sense in the end of this story. It was a creepy experience, but years later was when it got a whole lot creepier. When news broke they were going to build a funeral home on the exact ground of the dance hall, exactly where the verse was written that said, "Death will rest here." The funeral home now has been built for years, and the coffins lie exactly in the same spot as the verse was written. That's why I would have loved to have taken a photo to see exactly the words, "Death will rest here." Of all the places they could have built a funeral home, I felt it so weird and creepy. They built one on the exact same place. There was a satanic verse written on a wall saying, "Death will rest here."
My name is Lisa, and I remember growing up, my grandmother used to always tell me stories about the Banshee, which was a well-known Irish legend. The Banshee is known to keen outside a window if there is going to be a death in the family, whether it's near or far. I was arguing one night with my mother, as she wouldn't allow me out to a party. I was furious, as my older sister was allowed to go to the party. My mom's reason for not allowing me was because I failed an exam. How lame! I ran to my room and slammed the door and started sulking. My room was ground level, as there was no stairs in our house. I was lying on my bed checking through social media on my phone, sure that I'd be driven mad with my friends' updates of how amazing the party is. Suddenly, I heard something strange coming from my window. I heard a tapping sound, and I got a start when I heard what seemed like a woman keening, which I remember my grandmother telling me that is exactly what banshees do. I walked up slowly and cautiously to my window and jumped with fright as an old withered-looking woman stared right at me, shouting, "Help me, sweet girl. I am very cold and I was in a car accident." I didn't believe the woman, but I did have a tiny doubt she might be telling the truth. Was I being paranoid over all my grandmother's stories? Then suddenly, I jumped back as the woman banged at the glass and shouted hysterically, "Let me in, you bitch! Let me in!" I couldn't bear looking at her eyes any longer as I ran into the kitchen and shouted to my mom, "Call the police!" I saw my mom on her phone crying. I asked, did she see the woman? But my mom didn't answer. She just kept crying. A few minutes later, my mom explained to me that it was the police were on the phone, breaking the news to her that my sister had been killed in a car crash on her way to the party. Some nights, I think I hear tapping on my window, and sometimes I even wake up in a sweat thinking I can hear the Banshee keening.